Hi, I'm Scott Wrighton. I serve as Decatur City Manager, and it's our pleasure here at the staff to bring you information every week about what's going on with your city government. I want to mention something that's been visible for those of you who drive on the west side of the city. Some good, some bad. The good side is that West Main Street from Oakland to Fairview was rebuilt over the last couple of weeks. This is a contract that the mayor and city council let actually last year, and it upgrades an improvement of West Main Street that was done several years ago. And what happened is that brick surface that was put on all the way from downtown through to Fairview, there were portions of it where the base had failed underneath it, and so it was falling into those base areas, making the surface rough and making it difficult to drive on. We have several spaces on West Main where that's the case, but the worst part of it was that section between Oakland and Fairview, right on the south side of the Millikin University campus. So we waited until commencement was over at the university before we did it, but then we had to close that section of the street, and now that's been put back. And it looks very similar, but you'll find that it is much easier to drive on. There's a little bit of residual sand there. That's because the contractor was required to put sand in to fill the gaps between the brick and to help it set and sit in place better. One of the things that was going on at the same time, and is still going on, a problem that was exacerbated by that closure of that street, was that the Norfolk Southern has been blocking at-grade crossings in that section of the city now for several months. Wood Street, just one block south of West Main, and the crossing at Rock Springs Road, much further south off of Taylorville Road, are two of the areas where the Norfolk Southern has been particularly troublesome in their timing of these blockings. What's really going on, the bigger picture of it is that railroads throughout the United States are making changes in how they stack their trains, how they put them together and run them more efficiently. And many of the rail systems, including the rail yards here in Decatur, are designed for trains that generally are no more than about a mile long. And the Norfolk Southern has been particularly prone to use much longer trains, and so they can't get into the Decatur rail yard, and so they simply sit outside of Decatur waiting until they can either break the trains or get them into the rail yard without proper consideration to how that blocks these at-grade crossings and creates inconvenience for our citizens and for our first responders. The city has been communicating directly with NS as well as the regulatory authorities, the Federal Railroad Administration and the Illinois Commerce Commission, trying to deal with this. It's been very difficult because the Norfolk Southern largely has ignored state and local government and our petitions for them to address these safety problems because for the most part, the courts have ruled that this is a federal matter. So please know that your mayor and council and city staff are working very hard on this. But dealing with the Norfolk Southern Railroad has been a difficult matter because they really haven't been that interested in keeping these crossings open, despite the fact that they say that they are. We'll continue to work on it. At the last city council meeting, which was actually a study session of the city council, we talked about two key topics that I'd like to share with you a little bit about. One has to do with the Civic Center and some improvements that the city would like to see at the Civic Center. Let me provide a little bit of background for that. The Civic Center was built around 1980, so it's about 42 years old. At the time, the design and the financing of this were really very well thought out. At the time, there was a program that hasn't been available for decades now, but it was the Civic Center Funding Authority program, and it provided state money for local governments like Decatur to build civic centers with a significant amount of state money. But it required that they create a separate entity by state statute, which became the Decatur Civic Center Authority. And it enabled the city to move out of the now demolished old St. Mary's Hospital over on East Wood Street, which had been the city hall for 15 years before that, since the 1960s, and before that it was a hospital dating from the 1880s. And so that building was really antiquated, and so they were able to move in to this facility for very little new capital investment on the city's part. So it was a really good idea because the city got new offices out of the deal, plus a civic center to replace a high school at the same site that was antiquated. And at the time as well, I think that the people who made the decisions 40-some years ago realized that what the city needed was a theater and an arena, and this would draw people to Decatur and to the downtown area. And they were right, and it did, and it worked that way for many years. But in more recent years, There have been other venues developed for productions and theaters. There's other places where there's other civic centers, there's other conference areas, and so and as well as that, the event preferences of the population have changed, as you would expect them to do over a 42-year period. So now the Civic Center simply isn't used as much, its theater and its arena, as much as it was originally. So every year, the amount of subsidy that the city of Decatur has to provide to keep the Civic Center functioning and operational increases. Now, I want to be clear that the Civic Center staff does a great job of maintaining this facility, and those of you who use this facility or come here regularly can attest to that. So there's no problem with its upkeep. The problem is that it's just functionally getting more obsolete every year. So rather than wait for that to get even worse, the mayor and city council said we should be thinking ahead. How can we do that? What are some activities we can bring to the Civic Center site that would bring more people here, that would bring more revenue to the Civic Center Authority, and by bringing more revenue to the Civic Center Authority, we reduce the city's subsidy, which is substantial each year. So one of the things that the city council talked about is how do we attract a developer who would bring either a subcomponent developer or be the developer for a new hotel or for a restaurant or for other improvements to the public areas that would attract more people, something that's called a family entertainment center. I want to mention that this is, we are not in any way trying to get new city offices out of this. Our city staff are perfectly happy and able to work with the existing offices just fine. But the public areas, the arena, the theater, those are areas that we have to provide new activities for it. Otherwise, it'll continue to cycle down, not be used as effectively, increase the subsidy that the taxpayers have to pay. When the city council said, yes, staff, go ahead under certain parameters, go see if you can find a developer. What that means is find a developer who would pay for the restaurant or pay for the hotel. It's not that the city of Decatur is going to be paying for those things. Sometimes the local government is asked to provide some incentives to bridge the gap, if you will, between their expected return on investment and what the actual cost is. We do that with a lot of economic development projects because it brings new jobs to the community, it brings new investment to the community, and it increases the tax base in the community. But generally speaking, the city's not going to be paying for these improvements, and the Civic Center Authority, who actually owns the property, has given permission to the city to help lead this developer recruitment effort. In truth, the city of Decatur is actually just a tenant in this building. So hopefully that provides some additional background, and in the months ahead, we'll be seeking out some partners that will help us do that and comply with the city's long-term goals with regard to the Civic Center. One of the other things the city talked about was a component of the revitalization and rehabilitation of our neighborhoods, which is the city council's #1 priority. And one aspect of that, just one aspect, was the Jasper Street corridor. The Jasper Street corridor, running all the way from Lakeshore Drive all the way to Pershing, goes right through a significant portion of the urban core area that is the target of some of the redevelopment and rehabilitation work that the city council has been advocating for and funding in their budget. So this is one piece of that, and seeks to not just improve the public right-of-way, but also the properties that adjoin it. There are many vacant properties near or adjacent to the Jasper Street corridor. There's ones that are underutilized, and so this consulting arrangement will not only help us with the public appearance of the right-of-way, but also point us in the right direction, connect us with key developers who can develop some of those properties so that the whole corridor, not just the right-of-way itself, is improved and revitalized and reused in ways that advance the objectives of the mayor and city council. One fairly unique aspect of this consulting arrangement is that they're going to work with some of the neighborhood groups, maybe even form new neighborhood groups, whatever's necessary, so that some of the improvements that happen can be supported by these groups, so that they can be involved in doing it, so that not everything has to be done by the city. And in fact, for improvements to be sustainable, it's best if not everything is led by the city. A key aspect of our neighborhood revitalization project, not just along the Jasper Street corridor, but other places too, is to identify what I call a catalyst project. A major, larger, high visibility project that when it's redone, it will have the effect of causing nearby private property owners to say, well, if that's going to be here, obviously the neighborhood's going to be benefiting from that. I'll go ahead and fix up my garage or fix my porch or put new windows in or whatever it is. We've already started to see that happen in the Johns Hill neighborhood, and we're very, very pleased about that. One of the catalyst projects that we were looking at is over on the west side in what's called the Neighborhood United neighborhood, where the former Garfield school at the corner of West Grand and Oakland is located. That property is still owned by Decatur Public Schools, but they've been very cooperative with us in saying that we can take that property and use it as a catalyst project, and we have a relationship with the developer. We recently found out that the state of Illinois has taken a pass this year on the funding we asked for them to provide for that site. We think that we're have a good chance of getting it next year, but in the meantime, we're meeting with that developer so that we can have a plan to present to the citizens sooner rather than later for that large tract of property there that's also next to Garfield Park. So it's important to remember that in many of the neighborhoods, we want to bring with the input and the guidance and feedback we get from neighbors in those same areas, a catalyst project for each of those neighborhoods, because like I said, we can't rehabilitate every single property. We have to rely on private investment to take over at some point when the city has primed the pump through the rehab programs that it does and the catalyst projects that it does. There's lots of those, and so I'll just take them one at a time in future weeks when either I or other members of our staff get to talk to you about these programs. Thank you for tuning in. I appreciate this opportunity to share what's going on from the city of Decatur.